Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a story that'll probably hit too close to home for some of you. You ever notice how respect in a family sometimes depends on what's in your bank account? Well, tonight's story is about that, and it's personal. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to watch the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. I'm sitting in my old living room in a quiet suburb where the clock ticks slower than my heart and memories are louder than the television. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's comfortably embark on tonight's journey. It was my 75th birthday. The house smelled of lemon cake and old wooden floors. I'd worn my favorite cardigan wool, a little faded at the sleeves but soft as comfort itself. My grandson Tyler came in wearing designer sneakers and that new generation confidence that borders on cruelty. "Oh, poor Grandma," he said with a chuckle, tugging at my sleeve. "You still wear this old thing." Everyone laughed lightly. I laughed too. But deep down, that laugh hit something I'd buried decades ago. You probably wouldn't survive that kind of sting, not from a stranger, but from your own blood. Funny thing about humiliation, it's quiet. It doesn't scream. It just sits there in your chest like a heavy book you can't close. I looked around the table. My daughter pretending not to hear my son checking his phone, my daughter-in-law smiling too politely. No one defended me. That's the thing about family gatherings. They reveal who's truly with you and who's just there for dessert. People still debate whether modern families lost the sense of respect older generations lived by. But I've seen it firsthand. The warmth used to come from people. Now it comes from heating bills. Tyler's words replayed in my head all night, poor Grandma. He didn't know that the table he was eating from, the one holding the cake, was made from the very mahogany my late husband imported from his small business years ago. The business everyone thought had failed. What they didn't know was that my husband's so-called failure had been a cover. Before he passed, he made me promise something odd. Let them think we have nothing. The truth of people's hearts shows when there's nothing to gain. I didn't understand it back then. I do now. After dinner, I washed the dishes alone. The sound of clinking plates was louder than their laughter from the living room. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window, wrinkles deep, yes, but eyes still sharp. That's when I made a quiet promise to myself, one day they'll see what poor Grandma really means. Later that night, as I folded my cardigan, I found a small stitched patch inside the lining, a hidden pocket. My husband's initials were there, faded but still visible. He'd sewn it years ago, saying it was for rainy days. I never opened it before. That night I did. Inside was a tiny brass key and a note written in his neat cursive. "When they forget who you are, remind them without speaking." I held that note for a long time. My heart trembled not from sadness, but from the eerie realization that he'd foreseen this moment. Maybe he knew how time erodes respect, how generations drift. Or maybe he just knew that wealth hidden well teaches better than words ever could. I smiled to myself. Tyler thought I was poor. Maybe I was in the way he defined it. But real poverty isn't about money. It's when the people you love stop valuing you as a person. And tonight, surrounded by laughter that didn't include me, I understood something painfully clear. My family was rich in things, but bankrupt in soul. That's the tragedy of today's families. We've replaced stories with screenshots, gratitude with greed. But I wasn't done. My husband left clues, and I was about to follow them, not for revenge, but for peace. People still debate whether wealth corrupts or reveals. I was about to find out. As I blew out the candles, everyone clapped. Tyler rolled his eyes like birthdays were beneath him. I made a wish not for health, not for time, but for truth. And if there's one thing you should know, it's this. Truth always finds its way even through generations that have forgotten how to listen. The morning after my birthday, I sat at the kitchen table sipping weak coffee and staring at the family group chat on my phone. They'd sent polite messages, little hearts, cake emojis, half-hearted happy birthday mom notes, but not a single one mentioned what Tyler had said. It's funny how silence can become a family's favorite language. People still debate whether love can survive convenience, but I think families today treat affection like Wi-Fi, good only when the signal's strong. My children didn't call to ask how I was feeling, but they did text to ask if I still planned to sell that big old house. That told me everything. When my husband was alive, this family used to glow. He worked at the steel factory for 40 years, never missed a day, and always said, "Money buys comfort, not respect." Yet somewhere between his passing and Tyler's new iPhone, that line got erased. Now respect was measured in Brand's job titles and vacations. My daughter bragged about her promotion. My son compared the size of his swimming pool. My daughter-in-law subtly mentioned her diamond bracelet accidentally caught on her sleeve. And there I sat in my cardigan, the invisible shareholder of all their noise. I've read enough family studies to know this isn't unique. Psychologists say when elders no longer provide financial support, their perceived value drops. Some even call it the empty wallet effect. But what they don't talk about is how that invisibility feels the slow fading of your voice inside your own lineage. You start to question if the love you gave was ever real or just transactional nostalgia. That afternoon, I went to the local grocery store. The cashier, a teenage girl with purple hair, greeted me with a brighter smile than my own children had. "How are you today, ma'am?" she said. I almost teared up. Isn't that strange to feel seen by a stranger and unseen by your own blood? People still debate whether the modern world has made kindness rarer, but I think it's just changed address. It moved out of homes and into random moments. Back home, I walked through the living room, running my fingers across the framed photos. There was Tyler as a baby clinging to my leg. There was my late husband smiling with sawdust on his shirt. Every frame told a story of effort of years spent building something that now seemed disposable. Then my phone buzzed. It was my daughter. "Mom, we've been talking. You should really consider moving to a smaller place. You don't need all that space." Translation, they wanted the land. I laughed quietly. Oh, how money reshapes words. What used to be take care of yourself turns into free up the property. They probably imagined me as a frail old woman counting coupons in the dark. But what they didn't know was that the key I'd found hidden in my cardigan unlocked more than a box. It unlocked a plan. That night, I opened my late husband's writing desk again. Inside the top drawer, there was a faded folder marked Estate Projects. Among yellowing papers and old invoices was a bank document, a dormant account under both our names. The balance line made my breath hitch enough zeros to make any poor grandma a queen. But my husband's note beside it was clearer than the ink don't reveal. Let character decide inheritance. He must have known our children's nature before I did. He'd seen the greed forming the quiet competition, masked as love. I realized then that this wasn't about money. It was a moral test written in dollars. And my grandson had just failed the first question. For the next few weeks, I played the part of the struggling widow perfectly. I let them offer me their solutions. My son suggested selling the antique furniture. My daughter offered to handle the finances. Tyler posted pictures online bragging about his new gaming console, bought, as he said, because Grandma doesn't need my help. I watched, I smiled, and I stayed silent. People still debate whether silence is weakness or strategy. I can tell you it's both depending on who's listening. One evening, I invited them all for Sunday dinner. I cooked their favorites, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and my husband's famous onion gravy. They came cheerful and chatty, discussing real estate and crypto investments. Between bites, my daughter-in-law asked, "So, Mom, have you given more thought to downsizing?" "The market's great right now," I smiled and said, "Oh, I'm just waiting for the right buyer." My grandson snorted. "Yeah, someone who wants a haunted house." Laughter again, familiar and sharp. But this time, I didn't feel small. I felt oddly calm, almost amused. If only they knew that beneath the floorboards in a safe only I could open was the deed to this haunted house and every surrounding acre. My husband's final project turning our property into a trust for charity, and secretly a surprise for those who had shown heart, not hunger. When they left that night, I stood by the window watching their cars drive away, taillights fading like old promises. The house went quiet, and for the first time, it felt peaceful, not empty. I whispered into the still air, "We're doing this your way, love." Because this wasn't just about revenge. It was about restoring balance, about reminding my bloodline that wealth means nothing if it erases humility. As I turned off the lights, the key in my cardigan pressed softly against my chest, warm like a heartbeat. People still debate whether lessons should be taught with kindness or consequence. My husband believed in consequence, and now so do I. It's strange how a house can become both a home and a battlefield. Mine, with its creaking floors and lavender-scented curtains, had once been the warmest place on earth. but now it stood as a symbol of what everyone wanted but no one cherished. People still debate whether old houses hold spirits, but I swear mine held memories that refused to die quietly. Every corner whispered reminders of when family dinners were about laughter, not inheritance talk. A few days after that Sunday dinner, my daughter Lisa called again. Her voice was honeyed, but I could hear the calculation behind it. "Mom," she began, maintaining that big house must be hard on you. Maybe it's time to think practically. You could sell. Get an apartment and live comfortably. Comfortably, what a word. It sounds caring, doesn't it? But when spoken by someone eyeing your land, it tastes like poison, coated in sugar. I told her I'd think about it. That was my favorite answer lately. It kept them guessing. The truth was, I didn't plan to sell. My husband had built this house with his hands one beam at a time. He used to say, "A home isn't something you live in, it's something you live through." People still debate whether the modern generation understands that kind of sentiment. I doubt they do. To them, a house is a tradable asset, not a soul that breathes when the front door opens. Tyler hadn't visited since the birthday incident. Apparently, college life kept him too busy. But I saw his social media posts expensive brunches, luxury watches, a rented sports car. It made me wonder when modesty stopped being a virtue. Maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I grew up in a time when pride came from what you made, not what you bought. Still, I couldn't entirely blame him. Children reflect the world they're raised in, and perhaps we, the elders, failed to teach the weight of gratitude. That evening, I dusted the photo frames in the hallway. My husband's portrait smiled down at me, his eyes kind yet firm. Beneath it was the safe hidden behind the old grandfather clock. I knelt down and ran my fingers along the edges. The key from my cardigan fit perfectly. Inside, rows of documents glinted under the faint light. Property, deeds, bank books, old letters. There was also a sealed envelope labeled to be opened when they forget who you are. My throat tightened. He'd known. I didn't open it yet. Not out of fear, but respect. Some truths need the right stage, and this play wasn't ready for its final act. For now, I wanted to see how far their greed would stretch. You see, family tests don't require confrontation, just patience. And patience is the one thing I had plenty of. Later that week, my son Greg dropped by unannounced. He looked uncomfortable standing in the same hallway he'd grown up in. "Mom," he said, scratching his neck, "You know Lisa's right. You're getting older. That roof needs repair, and the taxes are no joke. If you sell now, you could enjoy your golden years." Golden years, another shiny lie. I smiled faintly. "I'll think about it," I repeated. He looked relieved, mistaking my calm for surrender. After he left, I went out to the garden. The roses my husband planted still bloomed fiercely even in late autumn. Their resilience comforted me. He'd once told me that roses thrive on pruning, that cutting away the weak parts helps the plant grow stronger. Maybe families were like that too. Maybe some relationships had to be trimmed for the rest to survive. People still debate whether blood always means loyalty. From what I'd seen, loyalty fades faster than wealth. One afternoon, a letter arrived, an invitation to the town's community fundraiser. I decided to donate quietly in my husband's name. A few days later, the organizer visited me with tears in her eyes, thanking Mrs. Harrison for her generosity. She didn't know I donated a large sum anonymously. Word travels fast in small towns, though. By the weekend, Lisa called again, this time with suspicion in her voice. "Mom, I heard someone named Harrison donated a lot to the fundraiser. Was that you?" I chuckled softly. "Oh, honey, I'm just a poor grandma, remember?" The line slipped out like silk. She froze, searching for a response, but found none. It was the first time she heard her own son's insult thrown back with grace, and it unsettled her more than anger ever could. That night, I sat by the fireplace with a notebook. I began listing things my family valued: money, status control, and then the things they ignored: kindness, empathy, memory. The contrast was painful but necessary. I started drafting a letter of my own. Not a will, not yet, but something close. A confession, a declaration, and maybe a test. As the flames flickered, I heard the faint creak of the hallway, as if the house itself were listening. My husband's old clock ticked rhythmically each second, a reminder that time always exposes truth. People still debate whether revenge heals or destroys. I wasn't sure what I was doing yet, but it didn't feel like revenge. It felt like justice written in quiet ink. I closed my notebook, placed the key on the table, and whispered, "Tomorrow we start teaching again." because sometimes the only way to restore respect is to remind people what they've forgotten, that love without gratitude is just performance, and inheritance without humility is a curse. My husband Henry was a quiet man, one of those people who could fill a room without saying a word. He had this habit of teaching through silence. When we were newly married, I mistook that silence for stubbornness, but over the years I learned it was wisdom disguised as stillness. People still debate whether silence is power or weakness, but in Henry's case, it was both. He knew that speaking too much gives away control and silence forces others to face their own noise. After he died, I realized how much he had prepared me for life without him. Every drawer, every photograph, every note he'd left behind seemed to carry a whisper of advice. It was as if he knew one day I'd have to face this family storm alone. One phrase of his always lingered in my memory: teach them value through silence. At the time, I thought it meant staying out of their business, but now, years later, I understood. It meant letting them expose themselves, allowing greed to make them loud enough for the truth to echo. A week after Greg's visit, I decided to go through Henry's old study again. Dust floated like ghosts in the afternoon light. The room still smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and cedarwood. His leather chair faced the window overlooking the garden, and on the desk lay his old ledger pages filled with neat handwriting and notes on timber shipments, payments, and something marked simply as Trust A. I turned the pages slowly, my fingers trembling. Trust A appeared again and again with numbers that made my head spin. Millions. He'd created a fund quietly growing over decades. Then tucked between the pages I found a slip of paper. For the kind, not the clever. That was Henry, always moral, always cryptic. I sat back and closed my eyes. It wasn't about punishing anyone. It was about protecting the meaning of his life's work. People still debate whether wealth changes people or just reveals who they were all along. Watching my children lately, I had no doubt it reveals. That night, I couldn't sleep. Memories of Henry came flooding back, the way he'd hold my hand during thunderstorms, the way he'd whistle off key while fixing the shed. I remembered the last real conversation we had before he got sick. He'd said, "If they ever call you poor, let them. That word will weigh heavier on them than on you." I hadn't understood then how prophetic that line would become. The next morning, I made a decision. If Henry believed in teaching through silence, then I'd continue his lesson. I would stay quiet, play the fragile widow, and let the truth build beneath their arrogance, like pressure beneath a fault line. When it finally cracked, they'd feel the quake not from anger, but realization. Lisa stopped by later that week, bringing a basket of fruit like a peace offering. She looked around the house as if mentally cataloging every antique. "You know, Mom," she said, "some of these pieces could fetch a fortune at auction." "You're just sitting on them." I smiled. "They're not mine to sell," I said. She frowned. "What do you mean?" I sipped my tea slowly. "They belong to the people who understand their worth." That confused her. "And who would that be?" I shrugged. "We'll see." She left soon after, clearly irritated. I knew that look. She hated puzzles, but I wasn't playing games. I was preserving dignity in a family that had started measuring love by what could be liquidated. People still debate whether parents owe their children inheritance. Some say it's a duty. Others say it's a gift. I've come to believe it's a mirror. What you reflect in your life determines what you receive in the end. The following evening, I found myself standing by Henry's chair again. I placed the ledger on the desk next to his old pipe and whispered, "They still don't understand love." The room creaked softly as if answering. I could almost hear his voice, calm and amused. "Patience, my dear. They will." I decided to visit the local lawyer, Mr. Collins, who had handled Henry's estate years ago. He was retired now, but still sharp, his office cluttered with files and the smell of old paper. When I mentioned Henry's ledger and trust, his eyebrows shot up. "I remember that fund," he said. "Your husband set it up privately, never closed it, but it's been dormant for years. Do you want me to look into it?" I nodded. "Quietly," I said. He smiled knowingly. "Of course." As I left his office, I felt a strange thrill, like stepping into the second act of a play I'd unknowingly been cast in. My husband had left me the role of a lifetime, the silent architect of his moral finale. Back home, I looked out the window at the garden where the roses were fading into winter. Their petals, fragile and bright, reminded me of our family, beautiful once, but now wilting under neglect. I whispered, "We'll prune it soon, Henry." Because that was the truth. Pruning isn't cruelty, it's mercy. Later that night, I got a message from Tyler. It was short. "Hey, Grandma, sorry if I embarrassed you that day. I didn't mean it." I stared at it for a while. Maybe it was genuine, or maybe his mother had scolded him. Either way, it was the first crack in the wall. I didn't reply, not yet. Silence, after all, was still the best teacher. As I turned off the lamp, the clock in the hall chimed 11. The sound was slow, deliberate, like the heartbeat of time itself. And somewhere deep in my chest, I felt that same rhythm, the steady pulse of patience, of justice, waiting quietly in the dark. People still debate whether silence ever truly wins in the end. I was about to find out. It started as a dizzy spell, nothing serious, or so I thought. One moment I was trimming roses in the garden, the next I was clutching the fence, the world tilting sideways. I remember the faint rustle of leaves, the sky spinning above me, and the distant hum of a lawnmower fading into silence. When I opened my eyes, I was on the kitchen floor, cold tiles against my cheek, with sunlight cutting across the room like a blade. People still debate whether age humbles you or exposes your fragility, but I can tell you it does both. When I came to, I managed to crawl to the phone and call Lisa. Her voice, when she answered, was hurried. "Mom, you sound awful. What happened?" I told her I'd fainted. There was a pause long enough for me to imagine her calculating the inconvenience. Then she said, "I'll send Greg. I have a meeting." I smiled weakly. Even in sickness, I wasn't a priority, just a footnote in their schedule. Greg arrived an hour later, smelling of cologne and impatience. "Mom, you scared us," he said, though his tone was more annoyance than concern. He helped me to the couch, opened a bottle of water, and immediately asked, "When was the last time you saw a doctor? You can't live alone like this." There it was, again the prelude to the same song, concern coded in control. At the hospital, the doctor diagnosed me with low blood pressure and exhaustion. "You need rest," he said kindly. I nodded. Rest, I thought. How do you rest when your family treats your existence like an obstacle course? Greg signed the discharge papers, but not before muttering to the nurse, "She's stubborn, won't let us help." Help, what a word. In their language, it meant decide for her. That night, I stayed in the hospital room, unable to sleep. The rhythmic beep of the monitor was oddly comforting, like the heartbeat of someone patient enough to stay. I thought about Henry again, about his belief in teaching through silence. Maybe this was part of his plan, too, to show me that even weakness could reveal character. People still debate whether illness unites families or tears off their masks. I think it does both. The next morning, Lisa finally visited, flowers in hand and pity in her smile. "Oh, Mom, you gave us such a scare," she said, arranging the bouquet in a plastic vase. I watched her manicured fingers smooth the petals as if rehearsing empathy. She sighed dramatically. "Greg and I talked. We think it's time you move in with me for a while." There it was, the offer that wasn't one. I smiled softly. "Oh, I couldn't impose, dear. You have your own life." "Nonsense," she said. "You'll be more comfortable. We'll take care of you." I tilted my head. "And the house?" She hesitated. "Well, we can handle the sale for you. It'll be one less thing to worry about." Her words landed gently, but pierced deep. I realized she didn't see me as a mother anymore, just as an estate with legs. I thanked her anyway, promised to think about it, and turned my attention to the flowers. They were beautiful, but the water they sat in was cloudy. It struck me how easy it is to mistake something dying for something cared for. After she left, I called Mr. Collins, the lawyer. "Let's move forward quietly," I told him. He understood immediately. "Are we activating the trust, Mrs. Harrison?" he asked. "Not yet," I said, "but we'll prepare it." Silence again. "And your family?" he asked gently. "They'll learn," I replied, "just not from me directly." When I returned home, the air felt heavier, as if the house itself sensed my fatigue. I sat on Henry's chair, closed my eyes, and let the stillness wash over me. For the first time in years, I prayed not for health, but for clarity. I asked for strength to carry through this silent lesson until the end. That evening, Greg came by again, this time without warning. He stood in the doorway, holding a clipboard. "I made some calls," he said. "There are assisted living places with medical staff, good ones. Safe. You'd have company." I looked at him for a long time. "You've already been shopping for my future, haven't you?" His face reddened. "I'm just thinking ahead." I chuckled quietly. "That's what your father used to do. The difference is, he thought ahead for others." The words hit him harder than I intended. He stammered something about doing what's best for me, then left abruptly. The moment the door closed, I exhaled deeply. My hands trembled not from illness, but anger restrained. Later that night, I looked at myself in the mirror. My reflection was pale, the cardigan hanging loosely around my shoulders. For a moment, I did look like the poor grandma Tyler mocked. But then I saw my eyes, sharp alive, filled with something my children no longer recognized will. People still debate whether strength at this age is stubbornness or survival. I think it's both. I walked back to the study and opened the safe again. The documents inside seemed to glow under the lamplight, almost daring me to act. I touched Henry's ledger and whispered, "It's time." Not to reveal everything not yet, but to set the stage. Tomorrow I'd ask Mr. Collins to draft a new will, not because I was dying, but because they needed to believe I might. Sometimes to expose true loyalty, you have to let them think the end is near. As I turned off the lights, the night outside was calm, almost deceptive. I felt the ache in my chest subside, replaced by something steadier, a strange peace. I realized that what they saw as weakness was about to become my greatest weapon, and somewhere in the dark I could almost hear Henry's voice again, teach them value through silence. The morning I went to Mr. Collins's office to draft the new will, I wore my oldest cardigan again, the same one Tyler had mocked on my birthday. I wanted to look fragile, unimportant, forgettable. People still debate whether appearance shapes perception, but trust me, it absolutely does. The weaker they think you are, the less they notice when you start moving the pieces. Mr. Collins's office smelled of dust and time just like Henry's study used to. When I told him what I wanted, he hesitated. "Are you sure, Mrs. Harrison?" "You don't want them to know about the trust?" I smiled faintly. "Not yet. Let them think they're looking at an empty chest. That's when greed starts talking." He nodded slowly, perhaps realizing this wasn't about revenge, but revelation. By the end of the meeting, a new will was drafted simple, unsigned, deliberately vague. It named no beneficiaries, just a statement, all assets to be reviewed pending moral conduct and familial respect. Legal enough to exist, confusing enough to ignite panic. I took the envelope home, sealed it, and placed it in the drawer of Henry's desk, the same drawer where I knew my children would one day search. The next few weeks unfolded like a slow play. My health seemed to improve, but I didn't mention it. Lisa called often, her tone syrupy with concern. "Mom, how are you feeling?" "Have you thought about moving in yet?" I replied gently. "I've been organizing some paperwork. You know, just in case." That one phrase, "just in case," spread through the family faster than a rumor at Sunday Mass. Soon Greg arrived under the guise of checking on me. But his eyes weren't on me, they were scanning the house. "You've got to keep your documents somewhere safe, Mom," he said. "Scammers target the elderly all the time." I nodded. "You're right. Everything important is in the study." His pupils dilated, just a little subtle, but I saw it. That night, I left the study door conveniently ajar, the lamp still on and the drawer slightly open. Then I went to bed early, pretending to be asleep. Around midnight, I heard footsteps, soft, deliberate, the creak of a floorboard near the desk, the sound of paper rustling. I stayed still. People still debate whether betrayal hurts less when you expect it. I can tell you it doesn't. The next morning, the drawer was open wider and the envelope was gone. I brewed coffee, sat by the window, and waited. By noon, my phone rang. Lisa's voice came through, trembling with poorly disguised shock. "Mom, we found your will." I bit back a smile. "Oh, how interesting. And what did you find?" There was a pause. It's empty." "Mom, there's nothing. No names, no amounts. What is this?" I sighed softly. "Maybe that's what I wanted to leave behind." "Nothing." Her voice cracked. "This isn't funny. We were worried sick about you, and you were you," I interrupted gently. "Or were you worried sick about what you might not get?" The silence that followed was long and heavy, like a curtain dropping after a failed act. They came that evening, all three of them, storming into my living room like investigators. Lisa was pacing. Greg was red-faced, and even Tyler tagged along, confused but intrigued. "Grandma, what's going on?" he asked. His tone was almost mocking again, but I noticed a flicker of unease. I stood up slowly, leaning on my cane, more for effect than necessity. "What's going on," I said calmly, "is a reminder. You can't measure love by what fits in a will." Greg slammed his hand on the desk. "This is ridiculous. You're toying with us." I met his eyes. Am I, or are you finally seeing that without the promise of inheritance, this family has nothing left to say to each other? Lisa opened her mouth to argue, but Tyler interrupted. So, you're broke. The room went silent. That single word hung there like a challenge. I smiled faintly. If that's what you want to believe, then yes. Poor Grandma. Greg scoffed. Unbelievable. After all we've done for you. Done for me. I raised an eyebrow. You mean after all you've expected from me? People still debate whether truth brings families closer or drives them apart. For us, it did the latter. Within minutes, they left in angry silence. No hugs, no goodbyes, just doors slamming and tires screeching. I sat alone again, but this time the loneliness felt purposeful. The following morning, I called Mr. Collins. It's done, I said simply. He understood. Then I'll hold the real documents until you decide otherwise, he replied. But I should tell you something. When your husband set up the trust, he included a clause one that only activates under specific conditions. I frowned. What kind of clause? Posthumous review. If the heirs display dishonor or disregard the assets, transfer elsewhere, charity scholarships, community funds. He called it the integrity clause. I laughed softly. Of course he did. That was Henry through and through. Keep it in place, I told him. It's time they learn that wealth without virtue is inheritance wasted. That night, the house was unusually quiet. Even the clock seemed hesitant to tick. I sat by the fireplace thinking of Henry. Maybe this was cruel, maybe it wasn't. People still debate whether lessons learned late in life have value. I think they do, especially when they come wrapped in silence and sealed with a key. Before bed, I walked to the study and looked at the empty drawer. It no longer felt like a symbol of betrayal, it was proof the plan was working. They thought they'd stolen something from me, but all they'd taken was bait. The real treasure, the trust, the deeds, the legacy remained untouched, hidden in plain sight. And as I turned off the light, I whispered into the darkness, let them think it's empty. The truth, like love, takes time to mature. A week after the so-called empty will fiasco, the phone rang early in the morning. I had just poured my coffee when Mr. Collins's calm, gravelly voice came through. Ms. Harrison, he said you might want to come by the office. I was reviewing Henry's old estate files and found something odd. I felt my pulse quicken. Odd, how I asked, gripping the phone tighter. A document sealed inside the back of his desk drawer. My assistant found it while we were verifying the ledger records. It's addressed to you, but also marked for family review upon discovery. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Henry's desk. The same one my children had rummaged through looking for gold and found only disappointment. He'd hidden one more secret in plain sight, waiting for the moment greed had fully exposed them. People still debate whether destiny has a sense of humor. I think my husband certainly did. I drove to Mr. Collins's office that afternoon, the cardigan tight around my shoulders against the wind. When I arrived, he handed me a yellowed envelope sealed with wax. It was tucked behind the drawer's false panel, he explained. Looks like your husband didn't want it found until the right time. The seal bore Henry's initials, H.H., and a faint imprint of our old family crest, the oak tree. My hands trembled as I broke it open. Inside was a single handwritten letter and a folded legal document. The letter, written in Henry's familiar, steady cursive, began, My dearest Ellen, if you're reading this, it means you've kept your promise to stay silent and let the truth reveal itself. By now they've probably searched, argued, and maybe even turned against each other. Good. A family that confuses inheritance for love needs to rediscover hunger, not for wealth, but for humility. I paused, my throat tight. Henry's words were gentle, but there was steel beneath them. He continued, You'll find enclosed a supplemental clause to our trust. This page wasn't filed with the lawyer originally, it was hidden intentionally. It outlines a new condition. Those who have shown greed will be excluded, and those who have shown compassion will inherit in full. The trust must remain hidden until the family's moral character is evident. If you're unsure, let their actions after your supposed poverty guide you. At the bottom, his familiar signature, Henry Harrison. My tears fell before I could stop them. Even from the grave, he was orchestrating a lesson, one that only true character could survive. I handed the document to Mr. Collins. He studied it carefully, adjusting his glasses. Remarkable, he murmured. This modifies everything. It means the trust's final distribution depends entirely on your discretion, Mrs. Harrison. My discretion, I echoed. He nodded. Yes, you are the executor now. You decide who has shown honor and who hasn't. I sat there quietly staring at the floor. The irony wasn't lost on me. The family who called me poor grandma had unknowingly handed me the power to decide their future. People still debate whether justice should be poetic. I think sometimes it needs to be. When I returned home, the house felt different, alive again, as if Henry's presence had returned. I went straight to his study, closed the door, and sat in his old chair. The faint smell of cedar and pipe tobacco surrounded me like an embrace from another time. I spread out the documents on the desk and traced the ink of his signature with my fingertip. He trusted me completely to hold the line to protect the meaning behind everything we'd built. That night, I received a message from Lisa. "Mom, we shouldn't have acted like that," it read. "You know we love you, right? We were just shocked." A sudden shift in tone made me smile. Apologies born of fear aren't apologies. They're rehearsed performances. Greg called too, pretending to check on my health, but fishing for reassurance. "Mom, you're okay, right? You're not rewriting anything." I gave him what he wanted, false comfort. "No, dear. Everything's exactly as it should be." That seemed to calm him. "Good. You know we just want what's best for you." I chuckled softly after hanging up. "Of course you do." Later that evening, I placed Henry's hidden page in a small wooden box and locked it in the safe again. I knew I wasn't ready to reveal it yet. Their test wasn't over. It was only beginning. They still saw me as weak, irrelevant, an old woman clinging to memories. But soon, they would learn that the quiet ones, those who listen, those who wait, often hold the heaviest truths. People still debate whether inheritance divides or defines a family. I think it does both. But the real inheritance isn't money. It's legacy. And legacy only survives when truth outweighs greed. Before bed, I sat by the window, the moonlight spilling across the floor. The air felt still thick with anticipation. Somewhere, I imagined Henry smiling, watching, waiting proud. I whispered into the silence, "I found it, love, the hidden page, and soon they'll find themselves." As I closed my eyes, I made another silent vow. The next time they came for answers, I wouldn't scold. I wouldn't argue. I'd simply show them what patience and principle could create when everyone else chose convenience. Because sometimes, the loudest lesson a family can learn is the one written in silence. The next morning, the rain came down in thin, stubborn sheets, tapping against the window like an impatient messenger. The sky was gray-heavy, as if even the weather knew something was about to break open. I sat in Henry's study with the hidden page spread before me, reading his handwriting again and again. Every line felt like both a message and a challenge. If you're unsure, let their actions after your supposed poverty guide you. Well, I was sure now. Their actions had been loud enough to echo through these walls. People still debate whether money brings out the worst in people or simply unmasks what was already there, but I no longer had to wonder. I'd seen it firsthand. The house phone rang again around noon. It was Lisa. She sounded almost cheerful, but that false brightness mothers can detect in their children had long since lost its camouflage. Mom, Greg, and I were thinking, "Since you've been under so much stress, maybe we can help organize your finances, just to take some pressure off you." I nearly laughed. They'd mistaken my quiet for confusion. "That's very kind," I said, "but I'm fine. I've been taking care of my affairs for 75 years. I can manage a little longer." There was a brief silence, and then she said, "Well, if you ever need help, you know we're just a call away." Her tone was sweet, but her meaning was sour. After we hung up, I leaned back in Henry's chair and stared at the ceiling. I remembered how we used to sit here together late at night, adding up numbers on a yellow ledger pad. The smell of coffee, the scratch of his pen, his calm voice saying, "It's not about the total, Ellen. It's about the purpose. Money is just energy. If you hoard it, it rots. If you direct it wisely, it grows into meaning." I used to think that was his poetic side. Now I understood it was his philosophy. By afternoon, Greg stopped by unannounced again, holding a box of tea and wearing that tight smile people wear when they're pretending to care. "You look pale, Mom," he said, sitting down. "Lisa told me you're still refusing to move in with her. You shouldn't be alone." I poured him a cup of tea before replying. "Being alone isn't the same as being lonely, Greg." He looked uncomfortable. "That's not what I meant. We're just worried about you. And, well, about your affairs." There it was, the real reason. I let him talk, nodding occasionally as he went on about security responsibility and making things easier. But underneath all those polite words, I heard the unspoken sentence, "Before you die." People still debate whether adult children check on their parents out of love or duty. I've learned that sometimes it's neither, it's investment management. After Greg left, I opened Henry's ledger again. Each page was meticulously neat columns of dates, names, and figures. But then something new caught my eye, something I hadn't noticed before. Next to certain entries were small handwritten stars, and in the margins words like good heart, fair, and selfless. They weren't financial notes, they were character notes. My husband, the man who built his empire quietly, had kept track not just of transactions but of people. And next to my name, one word, anchor. Tears welled up before I could stop them. The man had been building not just wealth, but a moral compass, a record of the values that sustained us. Every dollar was tied to a story, every decision to a lesson. I realized the trust. A wasn't simply money, it was an ethical experiment, a living test of decency. Henry had left behind a treasure far greater than wealth, the blueprint of integrity itself. That night, I made a decision. The time for silent observation was ending. The truth had to surface, but in a way that revealed everyone's heart clearly. I wrote 3 letters by hand, one to Lisa, one to Greg, and one to Tyler. Each letter invited them to dinner at the house that Sunday. No special occasion, I wrote, just a meal together the way we used to. I sealed them with wax, the old-fashioned way. A little ceremony goes a long way when you're setting a stage. Sunday came fast. The rain had stopped, leaving the air crisp and expectant. I set the table with my best china, the same set we'd used the year Henry and I paid off the mortgage. I even cooked their favorites, roast chicken, green beans, mashed potatoes, and my homemade apple pie. When I was done, I looked around the dining room. Every detail was perfect except for the empty chair at the head of the table, Henry's chair. I left it that way on purpose. They arrived just after 6. Lisa came first, bringing wine. She clearly didn't expect me to drink. Greg followed, his tie loosened, but his manners stiff. Tyler came last, headphones around his neck, scrolling his phone until he saw the table and muttered, "Wow, you went all out, Grandma." We ate in relative peace for the first 15 minutes, though the silence was thick enough to chew. Finally, Lisa broke it. "Mom, this feels like, I don't know, a farewell dinner." I smiled gently. "Oh, don't worry, dear. I'm not going anywhere. I just wanted to remind you what family used to feel like." Greg cleared his throat. "So, Mom, about that Willa situation," I held up my hand. "Don't I?" said softly. "Not tonight." The conversation stalled, replaced by the sound of forks against plates. Then Tyler said, "Grandma, are you still broke?" He said it casually, like asking about the weather, but I could feel Lisa tense beside him. I looked at him for a long time before answering. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" He shrugged. "Because Mom said it's not fair you have to live like this when you helped everyone. I mean, look at this place. It's falling apart." Lisa shot him a look that could have melted glass. "Tyler," she hissed. But I just chuckled. No, it's all right. He's honest. I appreciate that." I leaned back in my chair. "You see, Tyler, I've lived long enough to know that truth sounds rude only to those who fear it. But since you asked, no, I'm not broke." They froze. 3 pairs of eyes fixed on me. "What do you mean?" Greg said carefully. I continued that everything you assumed about me was wrong. The house, the money, the will, none of it vanished. It was waiting for the day I saw who deserved it. Lisa blinked rapidly. "Mom, are you saying you—" "Yes," I interrupted. "There's a trust, a very large one. Your father built it quietly all his life. He left me in charge of it with instructions." Tyler leaned forward. "Instructions like what?" "Like testing character," I said simply. "And the test began the day you called me poor Grandma." The silence that followed was like a sudden drop in air pressure. Even the clock in the hallway seemed to hold its breath. Lisa covered her mouth. Greg's jaw tightened and Tyler's face flushed crimson. "Mom," Greg started. "We didn't mean, oh, you did," I said gently. "And that's the point. You all showed me who you've become. Your father believed money should never go to those who treat others like they're beneath them. That's why he created the integrity clause. Only those who've shown kindness, patience, and humility will inherit anything. The rest goes to charity." Lisa's voice cracked. "You can't be serious." "I can," I said, "and I am. I've already met with the lawyer." Greg stood up, pacing. "This is insane. You can't judge us based on a few words." "Can I?" I asked. "You judged me based on a sweater." He stopped, deflated. No one spoke for a long time. The only sound was the wind rattling the window panes. Tyler stared at his plate, avoiding my eyes. "So I get nothing," he muttered. "Not necessarily," I said. "There's still time. The clause allows for redemption. Acts of genuine care can change the outcome. But you can't fake them. The trust recognizes patterns. Every decision you make from this point forward will be considered." He looked confused. "Recognizes patterns? What does that mean?" I smiled faintly. "Let's just say your grandfather was smarter than you think. Some of the assets are tied to community programs, donations, scholarships, all monitored through behavior metrics. It's not about spending. It's about giving." Lisa shook her head. "This is ridiculous, Mom. You're turning us into some moral experiment." "Maybe," I said softly. "Or maybe your father wanted to save you from yourselves." She looked ready to argue again, but then she saw something in my expression, calm, unwavering conviction, and stopped. For the first time, she seemed to understand that this wasn't about punishment. It was about balance. When they finally left, the house was silent again. I stood by the window watching their cars disappear into the dark. The rain had started once more, washing the driveway clean. I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. People still debate whether truth heals or destroys families. I think it does both, depending on how deeply the rot goes. Later that night, I took Henry's hidden page out one last time. Under the lamplight, his handwriting looked alive. "If you're unsure, let their actions after your supposed poverty guide you," I smiled. "Well, love," I whispered, "I think we've seen enough." I placed the page back in the safe, locked it, and turned the key, slowly feeling the weight of closure settle in my chest. The test wasn't over yet, but the lesson had begun. My family had just stepped into the mirror Henry built for them, and this time they'd have to live with the reflection. Outside, thunder rolled softly in the distance, echoing like a heartbeat through the night. I leaned back in Henry's chair, closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, I felt his presence not as memory, but as partnership. We had done it together, quietly, patiently, without anger. People still debate whether silence can rewrite a family's story. I believe it can if you hold it long enough and love deeply enough to use it wisely. For 2 weeks after that dinner, the house was silent again, but this time it wasn't the peaceful kind of silence. It was watchful, alert, like the hush that follows lightning before the thunder reaches you. I could feel it in my bones. Something had shifted. They weren't calling as much, not out of anger perhaps, but because they didn't know what to say. When love and money are entangled, cutting one means choking the other. People still debate whether families can ever truly recover once money becomes the measure of affection. I wasn't sure. But I did know this: for the first time, I was the one setting the terms. The morning light poured into Henry's study like liquid gold. I made my tea, opened the curtains, and looked at the world outside. The same trees, the same birds, but I saw everything differently. I felt both powerful and unbearably alone. Justice is a quiet kind of company. It keeps you upright but never warm. I thought about calling Lisa or Greg, but I resisted. If they wanted to mend something, they'd have to start it themselves. My silence was their invitation. Whether they'd accept it or not, that would be the test. On the third day, a knock came at the door. I opened it to find Tyler standing there, hands shoved into his hoodie pockets, eyes darting like he wasn't sure he should be there. "Hey, Grandma," he mumbled. "Can I come in?" His voice was small, uncertain, so unlike the smug tone from my birthday. I nodded and stepped aside. He followed me to the kitchen. I offered him tea. He declined, asking for water instead. That small, polite refusal told me more than words could. He sat down, staring at his fingers, twisting the rubber band around his wrist. Finally, he said I wanted to say, "I'm sorry." Not the kind of sorry where someone tells you to say it, but like, real sorry. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I studied his face, the soft exhaustion around his eyes, the way his shoulders sagged. He looked like a boy who'd finally run out of bravado. "What changed?" I asked gently. He hesitated, then said, "I saw your name on the donation list at school. The library renovation, you funded it, didn't you?" They said it was anonymous, but the librarian told me she saw your handwriting on the check. I smiled faintly. "And how did that make you feel?" He swallowed hard. "Embarrassed, I guess. I mean, I called you poor, and there you are helping everyone while I—" He trailed off ashamed. "People still debate whether guilt can lead to real change. I think it can, but only if it comes from recognition, not exposure." Tyler's apology wasn't rehearsed. It was raw, clumsy, but it was his. "You know," I said softly, "your grandfather used to say, money is like a river. It's meant to flow through you, not stop at you. When you hold it too tight, it stagnates." He nodded slowly. "I get that now. I thought money made people powerful, but seeing Mom and Uncle fight like that, it's ugly. I don't want to end up like that." Something inside me loosened a tiny knot of resentment that had sat in my chest for months. Maybe, just maybe, the lesson was working. "Tyler," I said, "the wealth in this family isn't disappearing. It's waiting. But when it finds its rightful owners, I want them to know it's not a reward. It's a responsibility." He looked confused. "Does that mean—" "You'll change your mind?" I shook my head. "No, dear, I won't need to. You will." He frowned, but I could tell he understood something deeper than the words. Before he left, he hugged me, something he hadn't done in years. It was awkward, quick, but genuine. As he walked down the path, I felt Henry's invisible nod beside me. The first seed had taken root. A few days later, I went to town for groceries. The local bakery owner, Mrs. Keller, waved from behind the counter. "Bless you, Mrs. Harrison," she said. "Those school donations made a real difference. Kids have new computers now." I smiled, but said nothing. Acts of kindness don't need applause. People still debate whether anonymous giving matters when no one knows who did it. I think it matters most then. When I returned home, there was an envelope in the mailbox with no return address. Inside was a note in Lisa's handwriting. "Mom, I'm sorry. I know we've disappointed you. I don't know if we can fix everything, but can I come by this weekend? Alone." That made me pause. Lisa was the proud one, the strategist, the self-appointed family manager. For her to ask to come alone meant she was lowering her armor. I decided to let her. Saturday arrived quietly. She came without makeup and jeans and a sweater instead of her usual pearls and perfume. "You look tired," I said as she sat down. "I am," she admitted. "Greg and I aren't talking much. Ever since that dinner, he's been calling me selfish. Maybe he's right." I raised an eyebrow. "And what do you think?" She looked down at her hands. "I think I forgot what mattered. We all did. When Dad died, we lost our compass. I thought if I could control everything, money, property, the family name, I could keep it all from falling apart. But I ended up breaking it more." I stayed quiet, letting her words breathe. For once, she wasn't performing. "Do you want to fix it?" I asked. "Yes," she said immediately. "I want to do something that would make you proud. Not because of money, but because it's right. That was the moment I've been waiting for." "Then do something selfless," I said softly. "Not for me, for someone who can't repay you. And don't tell anyone you did it." She looked surprised. "That's it," I smiled. "That's everything." After she left, I sat by the window again, watching the light shift across the garden. The roses were blooming early that year, vivid, stubborn, alive. I thought about Henry, about his ledger of kindness. Maybe he'd foreseen all this, how we'd have to lose everything to understand what was worth keeping. People still debate whether wisdom can be inherited. I think it can if the inheritance is pain. Over the next month, I noticed subtle changes. Lisa began volunteering at the community center. Greg, perhaps out of guilt or rivalry, started helping with local veteran housing programs. And Tyler visited every Sunday, sometimes bringing groceries, sometimes just sitting quietly and listening to my stories. It was strange, almost as if the curse had lifted and humility had crept back into their bones. One evening, as the sun set behind the oak tree in the yard, I received a call from Mr. Collins. "Mrs. Harrison," he said, "the clause in the trust, you may want to review it again. Based on your observations, you can now name successors. I can prepare the final documents." I thought for a long moment before replying. "Not yet," I said. "Let's give them a little more time. The roots are growing, but they're not deep enough." He chuckled softly. "You always were a patient woman." "Not patient," I corrected. "Hopeful." That night, I took out Henry's hidden page again. The ink had begun to fade, but the message burned brighter than ever. I wrote a note of my own beneath it. "The test is almost complete. One has learned remorse, one seeks redemption, one still hides behind pride. But love, quiet, unconditional love, remains my compass." I folded it neatly and placed it back in the box. A week later, Greg showed up. His face was pale, his eyes tired. "Mom," he said, "I need to talk." I poured tea without asking why. "I messed up," he confessed. "I said terrible things to you. I was angry, not at you, but at myself. My business is failing. I didn't want anyone to know. I thought if I got your house sold, I could cover my debts before anyone found out." Ah, there it was, the truth behind his desperation. "Why didn't you just ask for help?" I asked quietly. "Because I didn't deserve it," he whispered. For the first time, I believed him. There was no manipulation in his eyes, no slick words, just exhaustion and regret. "You don't need to deserve help," I said. "You need to earn trust again. There's a difference." He nodded slowly. "I understand now. You and Dad built something real. I ruined it. I don't expect forgiveness, but I'm trying." As he left, he paused at the door. "Mom, if Dad were here, what would he say?" I smiled faintly. "He'd tell you the same thing he told me, teach them value through chance. And then he'd make you fix the fence before dinner." Greg laughed through his tears, and for the first time in years, that sound didn't hurt me. It healed something small and fragile inside. When the house grew quiet again, I sat by the fire and let myself breathe. The test wasn't about punishing them. It was about remembering who we were before money distorted everything. Henry's lesson was working. Maybe not perfectly, but enough. People still debate whether the older generation should forgive the younger for their selfishness. I think forgiveness isn't a gift, it's a bridge. And you don't build a bridge by shouting, you build it by waiting, stone by stone, until the other side starts walking toward you. That night, I wrote my final notes for Mr. Collins' Lisa acts of service. Greg, truth in vulnerability. Tyler, humility discovered. Trust distribution, equal parts heart and history. The ink dried slowly. As I folded the paper, I realized I wasn't just writing instructions, I was closing a circle. The moral, financial, and emotional debts were finally being reconciled. When I turned off the lights, I walked through the quiet house one last time. Every picture frame, every dent in the wall, every scuff on the floor carried a piece of us, our laughter, our mistakes, our lessons. The house was no longer a battlefield. It was a teacher patient and wise. And as I climbed the stairs, the words came to me as clearly as if Henry were whispering them in my ear. The real inheritance isn't what you leave in the bank. It's what you leave in their hearts. I paused at the top step, smiled through my tears, and whispered back, "Then, love, I think we've done our job." The morning Henry's will was finally read, the real one. The air felt unusually still, as if even the wind had paused to listen. The house smelled of candle wax and polished wood, that familiar scent of endings dressed as beginnings. People still debate whether funerals are for the living or the dead, but I knew this day was for the living, for the ones who had learned, for the ones who hadn't, and for the truth that had waited too long in silence. Henry had been gone for years, yet this moment felt like his final breath, rippling through time like the gentle exhale of a man who'd orchestrated every detail down to the last heartbeat. The lawyer, Mr. Collins, stood near the fireplace holding a leather folder thick with papers. Lisa, Greg, and Tyler sat across from him, their faces pale and stiff with anticipation. I sat in Henry's chair, the one I hadn't touched for months. It felt right that way. His presence filled the room like soft music, invisible but undeniable. I could almost hear him, humming under his breath, waiting to see if his lesson had taken root. Mr. Collins cleared his throat. "We're gathered today not only to revisit Mr. Henry Harrison's estate, but to finalize a supplemental clause that was recently uncovered." Lisa folded her hands tightly in her lap. Greg leaned forward and Tyler's leg bounced nervously. The air was thick with restrained hope and leftover guilt. Mr. Collins continued, "Mr. Harrison left a message to be read only when the family had demonstrated the full measure of their character. Mrs. Harrison," he nodded to me, "has deemed that time has come." Every head turned toward me. I met their eyes one by one, my children, my grandson, and smiled faintly. Not triumphantly, not cruelly, but with the kind of softness that only comes after heartbreak. "Please proceed," I said. Mr. Collins opened the folder, pulled out a yellowed sheet sealed with wax, and began to read. "To my beloved family, if you are hearing this, it means you have walked through fire. Perhaps not gracefully, but you have walked nonetheless. The wealth I leave behind is not meant to divide you, but to reveal you. The measure of a family is not in its fortune, but in its forgiveness." Lisa's lip trembled. Greg stared at the floor. Those who have rediscovered humility, those who have chosen kindness over comfort, will inherit not just what I built, but the meaning of it. Those who have not will have something even greater to gain the chance to rebuild themselves without it. Mr. Collins paused, letting the words breathe. To my son Greg, I leave the Harrison Timber Company under one condition: that you use it not for profit, but for purpose. Partner with veterans and displaced workers. Give them the dignity of craft again. If you do not, the ownership will dissolve into community hands. Greg's head snapped up. He blinked, stunned. To my daughter, Lisa, I leave the remaining estate funds in the trust, but only as a steward. Use them for education, health, and housing in this town. If you do this faithfully, your portion will double. If not, it returns to the same cause you neglected. Lisa began to cry quietly, her shoulders shaking. And to my grandson Tyler, I leave the Harrison home itself, the house that taught us everything, provided that you never sell it. Instead, open its doors. Let it breathe again. Turn it into a place where people can come, not to own, but to learn. Let it remind them that wealth begins with gratitude. The room went completely silent. Tyler's mouth fell open slightly. Grandpa left me the house. I smiled gently. He left it to the one who saw the lesson soonest. Mr. Collins continued, To my beloved Ellen, my anchor, my compass, I leave no instructions. You have already carried them out. This family stands because you refuse to let it fall. What remains is yours in peace and in legacy. The lawyer's voice softened as he reached the final line. To all of you, remember that inheritance isn't what we leave behind. It's what we awaken within each other. That is the truth behind the numbers. He folded the paper slowly, reverently. The sound of it closing felt like a door shutting on the past. No one spoke for a long time. I could see the weight of it landing in each of them: shame, relief, confusion, awe. Henry's words didn't just divide the estate. They rearranged the meaning of everything they thought they knew about family. Finally, Lisa wiped her eyes. Mom, she whispered, I don't deserve this. I took her hand. You didn't, but you earned it. Greg exhaled a long, broken sigh. He always knew how to make a point. Tyler still looked stunned. I don't even know how to do what he asked. I chuckled softly. Start by opening the door. He smiled for the first time in months. I can do that. People still debate whether redemption ever truly balances the scales. I think it doesn't erase what came before, but it builds something new on top of it. That's enough. Later, after they left, I walked through the empty house one last time as the afternoon sun poured through the windows, gilding the furniture in warm gold. The walls seemed lighter, freer. For years, they'd absorbed our arguments, our laughter, our silences. Now they finally exhaled. In the study, I placed Henry's hidden page back into the safe and closed it for good. There was no more need for secrets. His lesson had found its way home. As I stepped outside, the air was cool and clean. The roses bloomed brighter than ever, their petals glistening with dew. I could almost hear Henry's voice carried on the breeze. Teach them value through silence. I whispered back, I did love. They heard it in the end. The next day, Tyler began repainting the porch. Lisa came by with boxes of books for the community library. Greg started drafting plans for veteran housing. It wasn't perfection, but it was redemption in progress, a living memorial to the man who believed that morality could be measured not by what you take, but by what you give back. People still debate whether lessons from the dead can truly change the living, but I saw it happening right there on my front lawn between brushstrokes and laughter, and for the first time in years, I felt at peace. That night, I sat by the window, the house quiet except for the distant murmur of crickets. I thought about how easily families can break and how miraculously they can mend when truth stops hiding. The reflection in the glass showed an old woman in her faded cardigan, but I didn't see poor Grandma. I saw the keeper of a legacy, one written in silence, tested by greed and redeemed through grace. As I closed my eyes, I whispered to the darkness, "Thank you for staying with me, Henry. I hope they'll carry this forward." And somewhere in the quiet of that old house, I could almost swear I heard his laughter, warm, gentle, proud. People still debate whether wealth corrupts or refines. In our family, it did both. But in the end, love, patient, steady, unspoken love won the war. So if you're listening out there tonight, wherever you are, remember this family isn't defined by blood money or legacy. It's defined by what you choose to forgive. Now, Turn off the lights, let the quiet settle. And if you've ever felt unseen or underestimated, know this. Sometimes the ones the world calls poor are the ones who've already learned what wealth truly means. Good night, my friends, and thank you for listening.